There's 168 hours in every week, and usually we only use one of them to glorify God or to spend time with Him. But this week on the 167, we're going to sit down with Pastor Rick and Pastor Jake and talk about this week's message and also hear a 7-minute story from a member of our congregation. Welcome to the 167. Hey, welcome back to the 167. I am Pastor Lucas Motley, and with me today is, not in descending order of importance, Jake Reeves, the creative arts pastor, and Rick George, the senior pastor of New Life Community Church. So welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good day to see you. Welcome to you that are listening on the podcast. We're glad you're joining us for another episode of the 167. And today we are talking about what we did on Sunday morning with the woman at the well. We're in John 4, and we have concluded our series, The Challenge. Oh, we could do that better. Ready? We've concluded our series,
The Challenge.
I love it. So we're concluding that series, and I hope that you guys at home have done that. You can go still on your app and catch up on that and finish that up. We were watching through The Chosen and then taking some daily challenges. So let's just start off by asking, so the woman at the well, this is a pretty famous story in the Bible. What draws you to this story?
It's just life. It's real. It's, she's like every other person alive, has issues, has some shame, some guilt, things that make her an outcast in a lot of people's eyes in society. And Jesus just comes and meets her right there in that place and doesn't avoid her. In fact, he makes a special trip and goes through Samaria just to have that encounter with her. So just, encouraging that in my lostness and other people's lostness, that Jesus doesn't avoid us, but he makes that special trip to meet us where we are.
Cool. What about you, Jake? What draws you to the story?
Yeah, obviously I love what Jesus is doing in the story, but I'm going to take the other side in the sense of I really I relate to the woman, or at least in the sense of where, she doesn't get what he's talking about with living water, and I think about in my own life, and I think about especially now as a pastor getting to intersect with so many people in the faith and see them come and they're seeking something, and it's like, no, like that's not what this is about. But like, I promise you, if you knew what this is about, you would want this so much more than what it is you're interested in. And so I relate to the fact that she doesn't get it, and the fact that Jesus doesn't browbeat her, and he is still pointing her to like, no, I'm going to give you what you actually need.
Yeah, like how many times have you talked to somebody and they're like, well, this is what's going on in my life, and you're like, oh, so what you're saying is what you need, and then you spell out, no, I don't think that's it.
I just need my husband to bend the knee to me and everything. It's like, well, there's probably communicating, whatever.
So we've been watching through The Chosen, and this is the last season, or the last episode of the first season, episode 8. And he has this encounter with the woman in the well. Again, disclaimer, it's not scripture, it's a dramatization.
Not a documentary.
Yeah, not a documentary, it's a dramatization. So, though, in that book, the episode of The Chosen, what helped draw you into the story through that dramatization?
Yeah, so again, just the her life, just the reality that she was in.
I love that you get to see that, where it's like, because we go like, oh, she had to go at the heat of the day, and you're like, oh, the heat of the day, that's uncomfortable, and she's like lugging these pounds of clay jars full of water through like 100-degree heat.
Yeah, and it, I guess what kind of just jumps out at me and just draws me into the story is that Jesus speaks to her physical condition so he can take her deeper into her spiritual condition. Like, so he's just talking about life, her life. And then he just jumps right into, go get your husband. So he knows her condition physically, but that's not what he's concerned about. He wants to get to this spiritual thing, but he begins let's just talk about your life.
Yeah.
Which is uncomfortable, but.
Well, and it's like most people avoid that. So, like, if I knew that about somebody, I would avoid that subject. He's like, oh, yeah, go get your... I mean, like, it's like walking up to a guy with a broken leg and be like, can I have a piggyback ride? Like, it's pretty obvious that's not going to happen. So, I don't know about you. Like, one of the things that I love, like I said, I think there's some great lines in here, and again, it's not scripture, but it's kind of an inferral because she runs and she tells everybody, this guy tells me everything that I've ever did. And so we have some of the words of Jesus documented on that. But I love when he goes into that where she doesn't believe and she starts to walk away and he says, your first husband's name was this. This is why you got divorced. Then after that, you couldn't trust me. And like he starts to walk through it, like her thoughts and feelings and emotions. And then she says, I've been rejected by everyone in this village. And he looks at her and says, but not by the Messiah. Yeah. And that's what he says, what you outline, which is, he goes, I literally came here just to meet you.
Right.
And so I'm like, that is such a powerful thing because it's evident in Scripture that he takes, like he purposely goes to Samaria. It's not by chance, but like to hear those words spoken out loud to someone where, I'm rejected by everyone, but not by the Messiah.
I have not rejected you.
Yeah, I love it. What about you, Jake?
I love the portrayal of Jesus and the whole series. Like I love anything that puts flesh to him, and because it's so easy, having grown up in the like the old school church with felt boards and everything, it's very easy to get a like monolithic or whatever clinical view of how Jesus is, and to see his compassion and the way that he weaves in that conversation and speaks to people. I think it's one of the most valuable things to me about the series. It's like you said, it's not directly biblical, but it adds a context that a lot of people miss when they think about Jesus and they're like, oh well, he's this at this point and he's this, and
yeah, it helps you see Jesus from a little different perspective.
Well, and even the language, like I started to notice this my second time through it, was I feel like I had the expectation in Scripture, because a lot of times it's this guy said this and Jesus said that, it's like, and you kind of picture where it's like, well, the woman rebutted him and then he said something and then it was like, that was law. And it was just like, and really he's trying to argue her into believing. And it's like, it's weird when you see people, a Pharisee question him and he's like, it's like some dude trying to make an argument, trying to convince somebody else. And I'm like, here's God trying to convince you of something, not like I always kind of, you read the Scriptures and it feels more like I have this booming voice where Jesus is like, I said that you should do this. And everybody's like, well, I guess we should do that. And it's like, rather than like the disbelief on their faces when they're like, I don't know about this. So in all of that, like I said, all of this is a great and rich story. You chose to focus in on something this week that was that phrase, if you only knew. Why did you choose that, and kind of why was that the focus this week?
As I read through that phrase, for whatever reason, just jumped off the page. If you only knew. And I don't know, I just kind of zeroed in on that in my prep time and my study time, and I just started thinking about all the things that I wish I would have known about Jesus. All the things I'm probably going to look back and say, man, if I would have only known the depth of that. And that just took me on a journey of things that, I know, I kind of know, I think I know a certain level, but if I really knew, if I really understood the depth of that love, like, would it change? Yes, it would change. If I really understood, if I knew at the heart, and I don't know, I just kept thinking that over and over, if I only knew. And so, that it wasn't anything magical. It was just, out of those words just seeming to stand out above every other phrase or anything else in there. And once I started down that path, it was like, the sermon was complete before I got past anything, into anything else. And
You
so-
love that when that just kind of
yeah.
unfolds itself.
So
Well, one of the points that you were talking about, if you only knew, was Jesus wants to remove sin and shame. And I think that we hear this a lot of times as Christ followers. Like, it's like, he wants to separate your sin as far as from the east as from the west. We shouldn't feel condemnation. We shouldn't feel shame. If sin is so dirty and it doesn't feel good, like we feel guilty about it, condemnation, why do you guys think that people have such a hard time letting go of it? Like, what do we gain or benefit from holding on to that? Because it seems like we gain something from that. Like, why
Yeah.
else would we want it?
Yeah, so I think part of it is just the spiritual nature, the battle. So an enemy that's continually whispering things into our ear, or speaking things at us, or trying to remind us of things. And so you have that element of that attack to bring it up before us all the time. The other element of that is our culture that we live in. It's hard to envision that we are not what we've done. We just kind of see ourselves, we see other people, so someone who's done something really bad, right? So if they've killed somebody, right, then they're a murderer, and you can't get past that often.
And that's their full identity.
Yeah, and that's who you are. Someone who has wrecked their life because of alcohol abuse. Like in our culture, we just say, well, you're an alcoholic. And it's just, and it's hard to get past those things just because of culture.
And Jake, what do you think about, like, because I agree with that. I think that is absolutely true. Like, how do you feel like that gets internalized for people? So it's like, I look at you and say, you're a murderer. But what's that transition into? I'm a murderer.
Yeah. It'd be, you take the narrative that either is being spoken or perceived to be spoken, and then you start speaking it over yourself, which is a tried and true pathway for the enemy, for you to grab onto an identity that is not who you actually are. And I think it is a hard thing to break mental pathways that we create for ourselves. And that's where the Holy Spirit renewing our minds comes into such a big play, because it's not natural to take on an identity that we didn't earn, like you said, for our culture. Like, you're not supposed to be able to do that. And so for believers to do that, it feels very unnatural. I mean, it's the same, it's what we run into right now with cancel culture,
Right.
is that single decision in your life that was poorly made at a single time in your life. That is your identity, and you need to be brought down rather than any other thing that's come to define you or any progress you've made. And so it is eons even before cancel culture. I know my great grandpappy, I'm sure, I'm sure struggled with identity in his own right, about working the
busy fighting
land
the
or
war.
something. Who knows? I don't know how many greats I threw in there. But yeah.
Well, I think what was a great picture is when you said it's a path. And I got that in my head. I was like, oh, that's such a great picture for people, where it's like, if there's a field, you can actually see like worn paths in there that, if you're tracking things, or, if you go out, there are certain animal tracks and paths and stuff like that they wear a path. And it's like, and it's because they travel down it so often. It's like, it's one thing to sit there all day, go, I'm sinful, I'm sinful, I'm sinful, I'm sinful, I'm sinful. And then you go, oh, God's grace, I'm sinful. And we're like, one of those paths is well worn, and one of those paths, you probably couldn't find it with a flashlight.
Yeah, so, there are people that have spent way more time than any of us exploring those neural pathways, people that's their life, it's their...
There is no one that has explored neural pathways more than I have.
Well,
it's a little bit of a hobby, especially of my...
So maybe
His neural
there aren't.
pathway
Okay.
workshop,
But-
and
But
It's just a slight hobby.
so we spend more time with ourselves than anyone else.
Ooh, that-
right?
Ooh.
So
Say it again for the people in the back.
so we spend more time with ourselves than we do with anyone else. And so because we know ourselves, and we just spend a lot of time alone with ourselves. We just remind ourselves of all those bad things. And we know all of the depths of those bad things. When no one else really knows everything, we know it all. Therefore, it's a lot more difficult to just simply jump to, well, I'm this different person. And that there is a lot of self-loathing and, because we know, and it just seems...
Well, if you like yourself, it's arrogance.
Yeah, and so it just seems like an impossible thing that God can just wipe all that away. And so you just look at this woman who she knows all of those bad decisions and all of her life and everything that's led up to that moment, and to simply have Jesus say, well, I haven't condemned you. Well, everybody else has. I have. I've condemned myself. And then to walk into that, it's a powerful thing, and it's not easy to just walk into that grace and forgiveness, even though it seems like it should be.
That's good. So one of the other points that you talked about, and this is I feel like it should be a segment on this show, because I think that we as Christians speak in Christianese sometimes, but one of the points that you said was Jesus wants to bless you, okay? And I think that means a lot of different things to different people. So when we talk about God's blessing, and you were talking about, through obedience, he wants to bless you, things like that. What exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about I get to win the lottery? And
he wants to give us lots and lots of money, cash. Yes.
If you were only obedient,
that's what
would be a
the
millionaire.
Bible clearly teaches, that if you're just obedient, he will dump boatloads of money right into your lap.
Please see the sarcasm.
No, that is
Disclaimer.
not. Yeah, that is not what it means.
Sure, but let's talk about it, what it means. When you guys think of, or maybe think about a specific instance where I was like, man, I was faithful and God blessed me. What specifically was that? Because I think that it's kind of a vague thing for a lot of new believers, that they're like, well, what does that mean? Because we don't use bless.
Yeah. So the word bless. You want me to give you some Greek?
Go for it. Ooh, hold on. Let's put on our Greek hats.
Yeah. Makarios. Makarios is.
That sounds like my best, friend from the Mediterranean Sea.
I was going to say
Makarios.
But you know what?
The age difference, I was going to say, it's my favorite Pokemon.
Okay. We've
Who's
been doing
that Pokemon?
We've been doing a lot of musical interludes.
Yeah.
Here on the 167. There's a musical reference to Makarios.
Oh yeah.
It's where the term Macarena.
Yeah,
the Macarena. You do the Macarena. Hey, Macarenas.
Man.
So what does that
here
mean?
You have the multi-generational, the Macarena, the Pokemon.
I'm blown away right now, man.
So that's where that word comes from, which means joy, or a better translation is favor. It's the favor of God. And we talked in staff meeting several weeks ago about favor and what favor is. But it means to receive. The Makarios means that there's a joy that comes from receiving the favor of God. It's not a financial, abundance, which what we tend to think, if God's going to bless me, then it's going to be some, monetary abundance. No, it means that you're going to receive the favor of God, the blessing of God. So you go back to the Sermon on the Mount when he says, you're blessed when people curse you, or, when you suffer on my, what, you're going to get an abundance of finances? Because no, that's not what he's saying. You're going to receive the favor of God, this blessing of God. So what it looks like, is, I've been faithful and obedient to honor God with my life. Pick a topic, pick an area. I'm faithful and obedient. So when I'm living life and I have a need, there's something that comes up and I have some need, then God's favor, his blessing is upon me, and that need is taken care of somehow. So when we talked about a few weeks ago, the power of God versus the favor of God. So the favor of God works through other people to open up doors of opportunity for us to step into and fulfill the plan of God. It's through other people. So when I am blessed and I have a need, that blessing comes through some other form, God's favor, somebody he uses to open up doors of opportunity to make sure that my need is taken care of.
So to put this in, like, for my family in that context, is I kind of joke with my kids sometimes about who's favorite that day. And so it's like, oh, Dad, I helped clean up the dishes without asking, and I'm going, oh, your favorite. I just joke, your favorite today. But really, I'm talking about favor, and I'm going, and I try to explain it to him like this. I'm going, listen, if you just back talk me all day, roll your eyes at me, walk around and stomp around when I ask you to do your chores, and then you're like, can we get ice cream? I'm gonna
Are
be
you
like,
talking about our staff right now?
Yes, I am. I
Because
said
we
my
all know that
family,
Jake's
but really,
the favorite.
Oh,
'Cause-
yeah.
because he never rolls his eyes, back talks, and all that other stuff. He's just like,
Because
But I mean-
that's so prevalent.
which
everywhere.
is why you bring him ice cream and you leave me out.
So you're like, why does Jake get ice cream?
But I mean, like, then when they have an ask of me, I'm going, no, I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
like, I don't feel like I can reward this kind of behavior, but I do feel like when you have a really good day, I'm like, not only will I, like, we'll go to Walmart and you're like, can I look at the toys? Sure, I'll let you pick one out. It's like, it makes it a lot easier for me to say yes to those things. And so, like you said, like, when I have favor, I'm going, I'm walking in God, I'm being financially responsible, I'm being a good dad. And so then when it's like, hey, God, I want, more responsibility at work, I want to move up in this. He's like, well, yeah, I mean, you've been faithful with what you've been given, so I'll give you, I'll have people open up those doors of opportunity to give me more.
Yeah, so it's really more about the favor of God, and there's a joy, that idea of joyfulness that's associated with it, more so than an abundance of finances. Okay, and it, you shouldn't just go around singing the Macarena.
Yeah.
I mean, the context of that is not the greatest, but anyway.
Because it's not really a product, it's not, because you look at, you can look at like the disciples' lives as they move forward. They saw the favor of God as they spread the gospel, but a lot of them still ended up on pikes and crucified. And
I'm experiencing the favor of God in jail.
and so really, like, I read something that stuck with me as far as when it talked about, it was a definition for blessing, which is, there's 1,000 of them, but this guy described it as it was a catalyst into the goodness of God. And so it's kind of a, that moment. And so, like, we experience it here when we're faithful and obedient, and the disciples experienced back when they were protected as they spread the gospel.
And it does not mean that at some point in that favor of God, that catalyst, and you're tapping into his goodness, sometimes his goodness means that there is a financial benefit to that he does give that to you, but that's not the thing, right? So again, there's, with anything, you can take it and run, and it's like, oh, now it's all about the prosperity gospel because he's talking about the blessing. No, there are blessings that are financial and blessings that are not. And that's up to God. It's his goodness. It's that joyfulness. It's his favor that we're tapping into.
Because that's a good question. On the other side of this, so someone's on their deathbed with, I don't know, a sickness, or like, has God's blessing left them at that point?
And we'll join you back now.
Thank you so much for that.
I mean, obviously, there's 1,000 things as far as context, but
I was gonna say, like, because
Thank you for that hypothetical question.
so let me.
I'm the weirdo because I'm going, I think that death is a blessing because it just means that your body gives out and you transition to that.
Yeah,
like,
that's perfect.
Yeah, that's always been what I'm, doing, where I'm just sitting there going, when people are like, oh man, I'm afraid of this, I'm going, man, the worst thing that could happen to you is in a second, you're like, and I always wonder,
Jesus?
yeah, like, what's up, Jesus? And you're like, I'm like, oh no, that truck is heading straight for, oh hey, Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's just our view of life and this life, and in the message when I said, if we only knew, right? If we only knew what heaven was like, and like, we can envision what a perfect life would be, and it's incredible. Like, when you think, what would this life be if everything just like if I had everything, if I didn't, like, and that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But if you only knew what heaven was like, if you only knew what being in his presence and the glory, like,
You wouldn't worry about it so
yeah.
much.
And
Yeah.
so it's,
Well, that's good.
thank you, Jake.
No, I was more thinking somebody who's, they've lived their life in the blessing of God. They've been faithful and obedient, like, and that relative comes and they're like, see, you're here, and it's like, has God's blessing left them? And I would agree with Lucas, where it's like, no, he's gonna go see Jesus.
Well, and usually when the blessing is that God delivers you from a situation, but then we're upset when you get into the situation in the first place, rather than going, oh, the situation is here, God's going to deliver me.
Yeah.
From this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that actually transitions really well, because I wanted to encourage our listeners right now that if you are listening to this and you have questions about things that happened in the sermon, I want to encourage you to email us. You can email me, Lucas, Lucas, @newlifegardener.com. And I look forward to some questions, because I really think that'll spice things up. We'll take a couple mailbag questions on coming weeks. And so if you have a question that you want to hear us answer here on the podcast, email me, Lucas, @newlifegardener.com. And we'll make Pastor Rick answer all your hopes and dreams and comments.
Man. Can't wait.
Yeah. So email us for the mailbag, and thank you guys for joining us. Up next is the 7-minute story. So we will see you guys next week. Hey, welcome back to 7-Minute Stories. We're here with Tina Haas. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Pastor Lucas.
So we're going to hear your 7-minute story. It's just going to be a time where we talk and you tell what's going on in your life, who are you, where you come from, what's God doing in your life. So you can talk about anything you want for 7 minutes. Those are kind of the rules of 7-minute stories.
All right.
And we'll put 7 minutes on the clock. And are you ready to take it away?
I am ready to take it away.
Tell me your 7-minute story.
All right. Well, this is kind of a story of my past and what brought me to where I am today, and kind of my relationship with God and throughout my whole life. So I was born and raised in a very dysfunctional and abusive family. And for a long time, that was just what I thought was normal. From a young age, I was kind of dubbed as the black sheep of the family, because I didn't always conform with some of the racist rhetorics or some of the other things that were going on. I was always the black sheep and the person with the bleeding heart and things like that. And this generational dysfunction and with the mental illness, my parents couldn't teach me what they didn't know. So I really struggled as a kid. I struggled with relationships and what a healthy relationship was. I struggled with just social skills and self-regulation and all of those things that you're supposed to learn as a kid. I didn't learn because my parents weren't able to teach me this. And so when I was in 7th grade, that was when I guess my story really starts. It's when, all of you're going through your changes, you're going through social changes and everything. And I remember just feeling like I was hated at home. I didn't feel safe at home. And so I would go to school and just try and keep my head down. And there was one day that will forever be just a black mark on my history, I feel. And I remember being in science class one day, and these kids started to bully me because I started having acne. And I sat there and I was just crying, and I looked over at my teacher and he didn't say anything, and none of the kids in my class said anything. And my teacher was just looking straight at me, didn't say a word to the kids or to me. And at that moment, that was the first time in my life where I just felt completely unlovable and unworthy. I wasn't loved at home. I wasn't loved by the kids at school. I wasn't even good enough for a teacher to stand up for when he was watching me be bullied. And so I went home, and that week I just kind of fell into a really deep depression. And my dad was a sheriff's deputy, and I knew where he kept his gun. And I was in 7th grade, 13 years old. I went and I took his gun out of his closet, and I went to my closet and I sat down and I held it in my hands, and I thought for the first time in my life about just ending it and just making the pain go away. And as I was sitting there, I had my radio playing in my bedroom, and a song came on the radio. And you probably remember the song, "Don't give up, you got a reason to live." And I just sat there and I was like, okay, God, I hear you. I hear you. And so I put it back and I decided to keep marching on. And that summer, one of my friends from the neighborhood, she invited me to go to church camp with her. My family was not we were not involved with church. I couldn't believe when my parents agreed to let me go because it was down in Florida. And so we went down to Florida, and I fell in love with God and with the community and with everything. And I met a good friend while I was down there. I still talk to him today. He was from St. Louis. And so when I came back, I tried really hard to just to live that life that I wanted to live. I didn't have the models at home showing me what it was like to be a good person and to live a Christian life, but I knew it was possible. And so I tried really hard, but my family, being the dysfunctional unit that it was, they didn't want me to be different or to grow in that way. And so they would purposely do things to push me to my limits and to break me, and then they would use that as their quote unquote proof that I hadn't changed and that I wasn't a Christian. And my mom, actually, I remember her telling me one day that she didn't believe in any of this born again stuff, and that it was all just it just wasn't anything that she was going to buy into. But I kept going. I went to youth group and to church with my friend Christy on the weekends. And my friend that I had met down at church camp in Florida, I met up with him. He came into Kansas City one weekend, and so we met up at the mall in Independence, and he gave me a Bible. It was my first Bible, and he actually snuck it to me because he told me he didn't want me to get in trouble. He didn't want my mom to get mad that he had given it to me, so he put it in a little bag and kind of snuck it to me. And so I would take that, and I still have it today. It's all marked up and colored on and stickers all over it and everything. And that same closet that I went and sat in with that gun that night, I sat in that closet and I started reading the Bible by myself. And the first book that I ever read in all of its entirety was the book of Job. And I didn't know at the time how meaningful that was going to be in my life. There was a reason that my fingers and my heart were directed to that book that day. So, I went through the rest of middle school and high school, and I continued struggling with issues with suicide and with depression and anxiety. And I married really young, and when I married, I started a career, I bought a house, and then later I found that I wanted to start a family. And when I tried to start a family, I ended up losing child after child, and out of 5 pregnancies, I have 1 son to show for it, and I'm grateful for that. But at the time, it was really hard, and it plunged me down into an even deeper depression, and I started having those feelings of wanting to just make it end again. I finally had my son, and then after he was born, the postpartum depression hit really, really hard, and I had a hard time struggling, trying to keep up with everything. And when he was about 10 months old, my husband left, and he told me that he was going to leave me because it was a sign from God that we weren't meant to be together, that we lost all of those babies, and that I just got pregnant and it stuck, and he felt stuck. And so he left, and I picked up and I kept moving on, but it didn't stop. It was just putting a mask on the depression and the anxiety every day, the feeling of not being enough and not being loved. And when my son was about 1.5 years old, I met Matt, who is my husband now. And he and we started a relationship, and at the same time, my family dynamics had started changing, and I had become really dependent upon this dysfunctional family to help me raise my son because I was a single mother. And they used that as ways to try and manipulate and control me, and it just felt like I had to get out. And so when Matt decided that he wanted to go back to Michigan to be with his kids, he had a couple of teenagers that still lived in Michigan where he came from, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go with you. I need to have my space. I need to have my own life. And when I made that decision, my family did everything they could to try and attack me and control me and to keep me here. I remember my brothers getting on my Facebook wall saying, you should just kill yourself, and God gave you all of those miscarriages because you were never meant to be a mom. Things that were said publicly, to where my friends and my colleagues and my friends at church and everyone were seeing these things, and it was just devastating. I felt like I had nothing left in the world. And so I cried my whole 12-hour drive moving up to Detroit. And then that first year I spent there, I had 2 teenage stepkids who did not want me to be a stepmom, and they made that very clear. And so every day I would just get up and do what I needed to do, and I'd cry in the shower and cry on my way to work and cry on my way home. And after about a year of that, all of the voices from my past started to come back. You're not good enough. You are unloved. You are unworthy. The people who had tried to use my relationship with God against me started really making me question my faith and where I was at. And I eventually convinced myself that my family would be better off if I was gone. So I told my husband one night that I was really depressed and that I was scared, and he didn't take it for the weight that he didn't feel the weight that it was, and he kind of blew me off. And I don't want to say that he's not supportive or anything in that sense. He is. He just didn't understand at that moment.
Sometimes it can be the, oh no, like it's okay, like
that, and that's
all
what it
is.
was. Yeah. And he didn't know that every time I got in the car and I saw a bridge, I was picturing myself falling off of it. He didn't know that it was permeating every thought of every day. So the next morning I got up and I wrote an email to my friend back here who was living in Gardner, actually. And I told her that I was going to be gone by the end of the week. So I left my apartment that day. I went to meet up with somebody that I was supposed to meet for the first time. And I remember sitting there talking to her and just having this normal conversation. And in my head, I was thinking, she has no idea that I'm just going to go home and kill myself. And I'm so good at faking it at this point, and I shouldn't be, but I am. My friend Tara got hold of Matt, and he knew where I was going to be, so he came out to the city and he found me and took me home. And he helped me get the help that I needed. And it was intensive, and it was hard, and it was ugly, just diving into all of the trauma and the emotional abuse and some of the physical abuse and everything that I had gone through. But I finally started learning those skills. You know, in my late 20s, I'm finally learning those skills that I should have learned when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, that I was never taught. And during this time, I really, for the first time, I really started doubting the existence of God. I had always just stayed firm in that belief, but I really started just doubting, like, how could these things keep happening, one thing after another? How could this keep happening? So I started looking into some other things. I'd always been interested in Buddhism. I started looking into what does it mean to be a Wiccan, you know, just kind of searching for, like, how do other people see God, and, you know, something outside of the Christianity that I had spent my life focusing on. And then Matt ended up getting transferred back here to Kansas. So during that time, I put it out there, and I said, you know what, universe, just take me to my tribe. Take me to wherever I'm going to be, where I am going to grow and become the person that I'm meant to be in this universe. And so we ended up down here in Gardner, right next door to my best friend who I had emailed. And we started coming to New Life. And at first it was kind of, you know, that was just what we did. I had still been going to my church up in Detroit, but I felt disconnected from it. And so when I came here, I really started looking into the history of Christianity. We got an archaeology Bible, and I started looking into the facts and the dates and the artifacts and stuff. And for me, I'm actually a world history teacher. And so that was where my brain was able to make those connections, where I'm like, oh, okay, there's some really good substance here. It's not just all of the spiritual stuff, but there's some history here too, and started making those connections. And we got involved with a life group and started becoming more involved with the community. And after a while, I just really fell into this life where I feel like today I look back on where I was 5 years ago, and I was just surviving then, just trying to get up and stay alive until the end of the day. And I look at my life today and I feel like I am so loved and accepted and a part of this community where I'm really thriving. And I really feel like I have been able to grow my relationship with God and with Jesus and with the people in this community as well. And I made it to the other side of the mountain. Yeah. And it's a pretty good view over here.
Well, that's an incredible story, and I'm really glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're in that good space where you feel like you're growing and you're maturing and you feel loved and accepted in the community. So that's very powerful. I'm really glad that you came in to share that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us here. We hope that this blesses you, and we can't wait to hear your story. See you next time. If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.